Shonen Jump's golden age rages on, with this year being a pretty big one for the magazine, crammed with all sorts of hit manga as well as a lot of weird stuff you've likely never even heard of. So strap in and get ready as we dive straight into Weekly Shonen Jump in the year 1992. Change Up by Shinji Imaizumi would last 21 chapters and 3 volumes following these. That's right, JoJo's Bizarre Adventures Part 3 Stardust Crusaders would meet its end in 1992 following the final battle with Dio. No more incidental stand users remain at this point, they've all been defeated, but so have 2 of the Crusaders, leaving Polnareff, Joseph, Kakyoin and Jotaro to face off against Dio, with the distinct possibility that more of them will perish. Dio so far has showed up now and then throughout the series, with the bulk of his scenes being in the last 30 or so chapters of this part, and it's honestly amazing just how menacing and built up he's been. Of course we already know him from Phantom Blood, but this Dio feels distinct, even more of a threat than before, which comes across tenfold as Polnareff confronts him on the stairs. He's smug, smiling the entire time as he goads Polnareff into climbing the stairs, and despite possessing the courage necessary, Polnareff just can't, which is all tied to Dio's stand, the world. The world and its ability are among some of the most famous parts of JoJo as a whole, but I think people might just forget or might not realize how well the mystery is constructed around it. For a long time in this last stretch of chapters, we don't know what Dio is doing exactly, which fills the Crusaders with a sense of powerlessness, only serving to make Dio look even stronger. And by the time the cast does find out what the world can do, it comes at the cost of Kakyoin's life. Kakyoin's individual fight with Dio is a highlight of the part. I love how time stop is portrayed in these gorgeous full-page illustrations, and then the emotional climax of the fight sees Kakyoin help his dear friends one last time by firing an emerald splash at the clock tower. With him now dead, Joseph falling quickly after, and Polnareff beat up after fighting Vanilla Ice, our protagonist Jotaro is the only one who stands between us and a tragic ending where the villain wins. Which leads us to countless iconic moments like the approaching scene, road roller, and a fight that's not only a ton of fun thanks to Dio being a maniacal bastard, but one with a lot of weight behind it, as at this point it feels like the Crusaders genuinely cannot win. Thanks to Jotaro also having latent time stop powers and using them in a strategic and smart manner though, he does end up matching Dio in the end, but not before countless stand rushes and a span of chapters, which is some of Araki's greatest, especially art-wise. Stardust Crusaders then comes to a close with Dio defeated, one last joke from Joseph as he feigns to be possessed, and then there's a quietness to everything. The realization that half the cast we've come to know and love are gone, and the thing that really got to me while reading this time was the stoic and silent way the rest of our protagonists part ways, pretty much traumatized by the ordeal, shaking. They were successful, they did beat Dio and they saved Holly, and yet Stardust Crusaders ends on this melancholic and lonely note. As goofy as JoJo often is, it's a reminder that Araki is a brilliant storyteller who takes you on these wild journeys across the world, fighting all sorts of quickie stand users, but by the end gives you time to reflect on the journey you just undertook, returning to it in a wistful and contemplative way. I think the anime's final ending with Jotaro looking at the picture of all the Crusaders together and smiling might be one of my favorite parts of JoJo as a whole. I know it's not part of Jump and it wasn't in the manga, but it really is such an emotional moment, especially with Last Train Home playing in the background, which I listened to a lot while reading the end of Stardust Crusaders this time, and all of that was a recipe for tears. And that's the end of JoJo Part 3, something I've been covering in the last 3 videos, so it has really felt like a bit of a journey, and it's probably been one of the manga I enjoyed reading most while trying to make these videos. So if you haven't read it in a while or have only seen the anime, I highly recommend picking up the manga one of these days to just read through. For now though, we've got plenty of JoJo ahead of us, and it won't be long before we reach the next part. Change Up by Shinji Imaizumi would last 21 chapters in 3 volumes, following a similar formula to the ones attempted in Imaizumi's previous works like Sore no Canvas and Kami-sama wa Southpaw, a tear-jerking drama with sports theming. Change Up would shift to baseball as its chosen sport and would follow Toma, a genius pitcher who ended up in a traffic accident after saving a young girl, causing him to give up his dreams of going to the Koshin. Moving on to high school, Toma would shift his goals to being popular with women and then encountered Kaide, a girl who he used to admire who inspires him to yet again pick up the sport and surpass his injuries. Like his other works, Change Up is a humanistic story. It sees its protagonist overcome great emotional and physical difficulty, but in a more relatable way, with it having strong ideas about opening up old wounds. It seems fairly well regarded despite its short run, with it having plenty of Imaizumi's renowned tear-jerking scenes. The art is also really nice, but it is a shame though that despite Imaizumi being a reoccurring author within Jump, no English translation of his work exists. Monmonmon, lasting 84 chapters in 8 volumes by Tsunemaru, would be a gag manga following the monkey Monmonmon. It seems to have a lot of crude humor, poop jokes, slapstick, and probably puns or jokes related to animals, with it dealing with monkeys a lot specifically. Monmonmon would accompany his little brother, Monmonchak, as they go through various escapades. There's arcs involving a monkey prison, a monkey tournament, and I think later portions also might involve a zoo or traveling around the world, with them making jokes and meeting plenty of other monkeys along the way. In a dramatic twist, the final chapter, not published in Jump, sees Monmonmon drown after saving his little brother, which is pretty out of left field for a gag manga, but apparently Tsunemaru was going for an Ashita no Joe kind of sad ending. This is also depicted beautifully in Monmonmon's final volume cover, where a 3D model of Monmonmon lies underwater. The covers of Monmonmon look amazing, by the way. I'm a sucker for artists getting creative, especially in a multimedia way like this, and love how different each cover is. The scribbly crayon of the first one is delightfully childlike. The second volume's puzzle motif is really fun. The ones with the models are super cool too, and I even found pictures of them which seem to be from an exhibition of some kind. I also love the 5th volume that sees Monmonmon adorn a leather delinquent jacket, and the 7th volume that sees the brothers come up against 2 real monkeys. Gag manga often have some of the coolest covers out of any manga. The current day Me and Roboko is proof of that with its parody ones, but Monmonmon is no slouch either with all of these. They're just delightful. Yagyuu, Reppuuken, Renya would last just 10 chapters in 1 volume by Takashi Noguchi. This seemingly begins as a historical battle manga, but quickly leans into fantasy as it sees the Belga Empire, who aim to gain control over Asia, target Japan, taking out the Yagyuu clan and kidnapping our protagonist Genbao's sister. 6 years later, he then goes to save her, armed with a new sword skill, traveling across the world and meeting a bunch of characters, including a few heroines, with Yagyuu Reppuuken being similar to works like Yoshihiro Kuroiwa, I think, another Cancel Jump author who would fill his manga with sex appeal, sword fighting, and mecha, which this would also be filled with. In its short 10 chapters, it would establish 3 main female heroines, which seem to be the thing most people remember about the series, as well as the mechanical soldiers, which safely push the manga outside of historical territory, despite some of the cast being based off of real-world people. It's regarded as an odd and indulgent work where Noguchi just crammed whatever he wanted into 10 chapters, resulting in a mess of a manga, but an intriguing one to look back on nevertheless. Explosion Space Bear-san, Tata Bear, and Kikuchiyo-Kun is a manga that ran for 21 chapters in 2 volumes by Tadashi Sato, coming off the end of his previous gag series Moero Onisan. This one would follow Tata Bear, an alien from the planet Dio Crystal who was banished due to him being an absolute failure. He then crashes to Earth and encounters Kikuchiyo-chan, a junior high schooler and the heir to a large conglomerate who is equally as pathetic and throws his money around everywhere. Together, the two bask in their own failure together and cause numerous slapstick disturbances for everyone around them, resulting in your usual gag manga shenanigans. Video Girl Len would follow off from Video Girl Ai's conclusion, lasting just 12 chapters in 2 volumes by Masakazu Katsura. Both are often paired together, but I thought I'd split up the two as they're different stories, plus it means we get a small dose of video girls this year as well as in the 1989 video. Video Girl Len follows Hiroma Taguchi and his best friend Toshiki Karukawa, both who have problems regarding girls, which one day leads them to Neo Gokuraku, run by the same manager Yota met years ago in Video Girl I. Here they obtain a video much like I's video, but featuring a girl called Len who similarly comes out of the TV screen, intent on helping them with their woes. Video Girl Len does a few things differently than I. While it is melodramatic and focuses on teen relationship drama, it tells a really nice, concise story with a clear message, which isn't as muddled as I's with its back and forth drama with Yota and the three girls he gets interested in. Video Girl Len attempts to create a story focusing on the idolization men have of women, the idea of purity, and the perceived value girls have by remaining pure and chaste. Its main character really is Taguchi, who sees girls, especially the ones he has a crush on, as pure individuals, and he can't stomach the thought of them breaking his ideal. Len comes around though and shatters this. I think my favourite scene might be when she just farts as a joke, showing that yes, girls fart and there's nothing wrong with that because it's a human bodily function. I just admire how straightforward it is, eliminating the gender divide and a lot of toxic perceptions that can build up amongst young people regarding the opposite sex or relationships generally. How it touches on the topic of virginity and chastity is also surprisingly mature, with Len at one point chastising Taguchi for giving up on the main heroine Ayumi because of the fact that she's not a virgin, saying, "Is that all love is for you?" In such a short time, Len touches on so many topics concisely, and for an author who's known for being pretty raunchy sometimes, Video Girl Len is genuinely refreshing, and I love the positive lessons it attempts to teach younger boys. Like Video Girl I, it also has gorgeous artwork. I really can't praise Katsura enough for his compositions, his character emotions, or his designs. Len also looks super cute. I love her hairstyle to bits. We also get a few cameos from Yota, who's grown up and can't see the video store anymore because no one stays pure all his life. It's such a good quote. It's never explicit in what this really means, but Yota seems happy and Ai is even said to be doing okay off screen. I like how they handled that, and I think this leads to Len being about dismissing society's perceived notions of purity as its main theme. It's silly, love who you love, take things at your own pace, and remember to communicate with your partner. These are things that Len pushes forward, with them all coming together and concluding in 2 snug volumes with an ending that really touched me. I highly recommend Video Girl I, and especially Len, and can't wait to see what Masakazu Katsura does next within the magazine. Baramon no Kazoku, or the family of Brahman, would be Akira Miyashita's follow-up to the widely successful Sakigake Otokujuku, however it wouldn't touch its length, lasting only 38 chapters and 4 volumes. It would follow the family of Brahman, initially a small household unit of 3 brothers, a father and grandfather, before expanding outward and including Brahman family members from around the world, each one being a descendant and follower of an ancient Hindu priest who used their powers of assassination to maintain peace and enforce justice. At the beginning, the manga would see the initial family take out threats, usually corrupt businessmen or people in power, after they've committed some foul deed, with them being controlled by the Brahman family's chakra to admit this deed and turn themselves in or kill themselves. It reminds me a bit of Shinji Hiramatsu's Black Angels, which we covered a long time ago in the 1981 video. Before long though, the series would expand, introducing the Masura clan, the Brahman clan's eternal enemies, and a potential world-ending threat. This would lead Ryu Brahman around the world, grouping up with various other followers from different countries, each having their own distinct chakra powers. It feels quite similar to Stardust Crusaders in all honesty, with a focus on an ethnically diverse group of characters exploring different countries and beating the threats that come their way, with Dracula even being one of the antagonists at one point. Sadly, Baramon no Kazoku would end right as the main cast was set to fight the main villain, who aims to start World War III. It's a shame though, as the antagonist seemed genuinely cool, like a Yakuza villain, and yet we end on an Our Adventure Continues style conclusion, when I think the manga could have wrapped up in 2 or 3 more chapters. Still, this might be one of my favourite works from Akira Miyashita, and I kind of recommend it as a weird companion to 90s Jump and Stardust Crusaders. I wonder if you'll get the same vibes as me if you read it, as this one is fully translated. Hareluya by Haruto Umezawa would last just 10 chapters and 1 volume and see the son of God, Hareluya, cast down to earth by his father for his bad attitude and lack of responsibility in his duties as the next god of the human race. Hareluya blends delinquent action and slapstick gag comedy, with the protagonist Hibino Hareluya acting as a self-centered and self-righteous asshat who proclaims he's God while everyone else laughs at him. Despite his proclivities of loving all sorts of debauchery, he has a good heart and helps others, usually by fighting other delinquents and the main antagonist, a drug-fueled psycho with hate and destroy tattooed on his hands called Kanzaki. Hareluya is anything but subtle, but it does have charm to it, and by the end of its short run I did find myself enjoying Hibino's antics. I think the whole idea of the next god having to learn that humanity isn't all bad and needing to engage with them on a deeper level, gaining a sense of empathy, is also a really neat concept, but sadly it wouldn't be explored further due to the staggeringly short chapter count. Is what I would usually say, but somehow by the year's end we would see the debut of Hareluya II BOY. An Axe manga coming back is pretty darn rare. There's only a few examples I can think of, but Hareluya's immediate flop was met with a sequel popping up within the same year it debuted. What's more is Hareluya would be cancelled, a one-shot version of Hareluya would come out within the magazine about 2 months later, and then another few months after that, due to extreme popularity, Hareluya would return, with it running for 295 chapters and 33 whole volumes, lasting all the way until 1999. So how did Umezawa turn all of this around? What did Hareluya do differently to go from mega flop to mega success? Well, it gutted its main character and the whole concept of God's son coming to Earth, opting to just be a normal delinquent manga instead. Hareluya II BOY would follow these same characters, rearranged and slightly different, or in some cases pretty much devoid of their core personality with Hibino. He and God are just real people now who live in a church, and Hibino attends a private high school with the goal of world domination. Really, this is just a way to give him something new. It lets him retain his above everyone else personality and attitude without him being a literal god. He's a lot less lecherous now, although he also feels a lot less human, which is weird because he's an actual human now. I'll be honest and say I found it really hard to like Hareluya II BOY initially. I don't think it's very good and feels very disparate and all over the place, likely because its core idea was just ripped out of the manga wholesale. Hibino, for the most part, doesn't even feel like the protagonist of most of the manga, feeling more like a gag character who just sometimes appears now and then to crack jokes at inappropriate times, or just to fight people effortlessly, as he never really loses, and it never feels like he's in danger. And I think it took a lot of time for Umezawa to really fine-tune how he fitted into the cast, resulting in him being annoying for the beginning of Hareluya II BOY's run for me. The other cast members, Ichijo and Okamoto, feel a lot more focused, especially initially, as their lives and dreams are the core to the first few arcs. Over time, chemistry with these characters does develop, which makes them feel more endearing, and I even found myself liking Hibino more and more, with him feeling like Luffy before Luffy. Like he's legit the same. Someone you could just give food to, and then he'll just beat the shit out of someone you don't like, or someone who just did a bad thing, because that's just how he is. While the whole god aspect is gone, by no means is Hareluya too grounded, with some arcs later on being especially unhinged. There's a fight with a bear early on, but things get really nutty with there being a whole arc revolving around this kid setting up a fighting game in real life, controlling a handful of fighters through an earpiece and getting other children to pay to watch these random delinquents fight his chosen fighters. One of the last arcs also sees a rich man try to prepare Empress Dowager Cixi's dark menu, which needs the blood of an infant, so the main cast fights an evil chef and some borderline JoJo villains in an attempt to stop the bourgeoisie from eating a baby. Moments like these, as well as some of the lighter slice of life chapters, are probably Hareluya II BOY's highlight for me and made it a bizarre experience to read that let me enjoy it overall. Brief content warning here, since I'll be tackling subjects like sexual assault in a bit more detail than usual, you might want to skip ahead to the next manga if that's not for you. Sadly though, despite all of the silliness, Boy is weighed down by a lot of delinquent manga tropes, especially with his treatment of female characters and an abundant use of sexual assault as a means to get its cast to act. Michiru is one of the main cast members, but sadly mostly exists to be kidnapped, and this happens over and over, with the threat of her being raped or people making underground videos of that act to sell coming up more than a handful of times. The final big arc also heavily deals with this subject, depicting a van of women chained up that's genuinely quite harrowing. Boy at times feels quite out of place in Jump. Now and again the art can get really raunchy or brutal in a way that feels too adult, but this final arc really feels like it crossed a line to me. I'm not sure anything I've seen through the hundreds of manga I've covered in Jump reaches this level of messed up. It's even more baffling then that this chapter coincides with Luffy trying to fight Don Krieg of all people. Jump is at its most edgiest at the same time as One Piece is at some of its most goofiest. The final arc does have some merit to it though, especially with its final villain Zou being an unapologetic sex offender, trafficker, and someone who lives in complete nihilism, believing humans to be no better than animals, so he embraces all of that, becoming an animal himself. It's really edgy and kind of goofy, but there is an idea here. For Hibino to come up against the epitome of hopelessness and nihilism, the very embodiment that humans are dark, twisted beings, if Hareluya Hibino kept with the Son of God angle, this would have had a lot of weight to it, I think. It would have made more sense why Hareluya keeps throwing these dark and twisted, horrible people at the main cast, so the Son of God could overcome the darkest parts of humanity and accept the good. Instead, what happens though, more often than not, is Hibino will shout something about wanting to rule the world or make some inappropriate jokes when the subject matter being tackled is a bit too serious overall. I hope that I am trying to convey the idea that Hareluya is almost something special. There's almost an interesting idea being tackled here, but it's lacking a drive to actually explore its themes, which leads to it being overly edgy, leaning into some pretty poor delinquent tropes that make it an unsavory read. I would struggle to recommend anybody read Hareluya. It's a forgotten titan of Jump's 90s, a work that can be funny or charming sometimes and has good art. I especially like all the music related scenes. Umesawa has a clear passion for music that really comes across. It just has a lot of problems in how it writes its characters though, especially its villains, which are all cartoonishly evil, and the aforementioned use of sexual assault is pretty off-putting, with it often being used in Hareluya's copy-paste formulas for arcs, which it never improves on. Hareluya II BOY would get a 25 episode long anime adaptation in 1997, but at least from my knowledge it's now an often forgotten footnote in Jump's 90s roster for how long it actually ran for, with some people remembering it fondly to this day. Even though it wasn't the best manga I've ever read for these videos, it was a very interesting one and a bit of a time capsule for the era. And continuing with polarizing manga, we have Bonbonzaka Koku Engi Kibu by Yutaka Takahashi, which would last 142 chapters and 12 volumes, being a gag manga following a high school drama club. It managed to last 3 years in the magazine, and in that time all sorts of weird and wacky things would occur, like the cast meeting dinosaurs, a whole sci-fi chapter with the cast just being different characters, and the whole cast getting transported into a video game one time. It has a penchant for weird and slapstick humor and can be surprisingly quite funny or charming, especially in its artwork, which has a sort of poppy style I'd associate with an artist like Hisashi Eguchi. Unfortunately, Bonbonzaka's main gag really drags it down and makes it an unpleasant read. The manga follows a new student called Shotaro who has fallen in love with the drama club's vice president, Makoto. Unfortunately for him, the drama club's president, Tokudaiji Hiromi, has fallen in love with him, a super deformed creature looking human who is extremely gay and predatory, with the main joke of the series being Hiromi being a predatory gay freak who constantly attempts to sexually assault Shotaro. Essentially, Bonbonzaka puts forward the whole idea that gay people are gross, and thus, isn't it funny if everyone thought the main character was gay and ew, look at how weird gay people are. There is even a teacher character who gets introduced later on who attempts to correct Shotaro's homosexuality, directly stating it as something abnormal and disgusting, while attempting to sexually assault him as some sort of joke. When Bonbonzaka is bad. It's absolute trash and demeans gay and queer people to a horrible extent. It's a shame as well because the next chapter could be a super silly and innocent one. I think Bonbonzaka's gags are generally really competent and funny. Its core gag though is incredibly bigoted and off-putting. Despite that, I can't bring myself to fully hate Bonbonzaka. It does lose steam by the end, but I did come to care for its cast, with certain characters like Makoto being a really kind ally type character who expresses immediately that there's nothing wrong with gay people. True love is true love. It's kind of a weird paradox. I really don't know where the author stands on anything. I think it's just meant to make fun of gay people for cheap jokes. Shotaro as well is just a nice normal guy, and he justifiably pushes back against Hiromi's assaults because he genuinely is not gay. I never felt hatred from him. I never felt like he hated Hiromi or gay people for like who they are, but he hated them because he was being assaulted constantly. Of course he's gonna push back because he's straight. Like, it's such a frustrating manga to read. It's like almost fun, and then it like hits you with something absolutely horrible. The best part of Bonbonzaka though are probably these little 4-1 Kun comics at the end of most chapters, which depict a really stupid dog named Kun and his family, mostly making fun of him because he's done or said something silly. I just really like how they're drawn, and they're a great distillation of the more silly jokes Bonbonzaka does best. One more thing I wanted to bring up as well is the covers for Bonbonzaka are gorgeous, with the cast depicted in different outfits of various famous stories or plays. They all look really great, and it makes me really want a manga that is like this, with all of the horrible homophobic humor cut out, where they maybe focus more on the drama aspects, which could have been a lot of fun. Silent Night Show would be Masumi Kurumada's final work in Jump, coming in at just 13 chapters and 2 volumes, a far cry from Saint Seiya and Ring ni Kakedo, and even some of his smaller successes. Kurumada isn't a name we've touched on for a while, but in making these history retrospectives, it's undeniable of his impact on the magazine, laying the foundations for shonen manga as we know it, so to see a work of his get so brutally cut short is a shame. Even more so too, as Silent Night Show is cool. It has a lot of Kurumada-isms of his previous work. It is quite formulaic, it has a plucky young character at odds with a huge organization of superhuman warriors, but it also might have one of the most engaging introductions to one of his manga that I've ever read. It sees Shou, a 13-year-old schoolboy, and friend Chirpy the Hawk come into contact with dinosaurs who want him and a fairy dead that belong to a secret organization called the Neo Society. What Silent Night Show then promises is an epic battle likely for the sake of the world against those who can evolve beyond human, embodying traits of our distant ancestors, kind of, like dinosaurs, birds, as well as slimes. Regardless, it's a very fun concept, and Kurumada does it justice with some great art and full-page spreads as usual. This doesn't seem to be the general consensus though, with a lot of people considering it a copy of Saint Seiya, down to its shelters just being cloths, and both series being very similar, with the themes of constellations being swapped out for evolution instead. Kurumada likely took this cancellation pretty hard too, with the final spread of the manga depicting the words never end in English, similarly to the series Otokozaka, which he'd eventually revisit and finish. Shou hasn't had such a luxury yet anyway, and I think an even sadder bit of text is Masumi Kurumada's final comment for its last chapter, which apparently just reads goodbye. Jump by this point had grown, lots of old school authors tried new series and a few more would try again. We've already seen Motomiya and Go Nagai leave after trying other ventures after their huge hits, Otoko Ippiki and Horenchi Gakuen decades ago, but in the next few years, big authors like Tsukasa Hojo, Akira Miyashita and even Tetsuo Ohara would return with a few series that would never reach the heights of their big hits, causing them to leave the magazine for good. Kurumada was one of the first of these to leave, and I think symbolically at least it marks the beginning of the end for Jump's golden age. Starting in 1992, we would also get something a little different that's always fascinated me, the beginning of a Chinese manga magazine called Formosa Youth. The early 1990s saw China crack down on bootlegging, which included things like manga magazines, which pushed some bootlegging operations to start publishing through legitimate means, Formosa Youth included. This wasn't actually the first official magazine to serialize Jump manga, with at least Rem and Shaonan Top in Taiwan doing something similar in 1990, but Formosa Youth has always stuck out to me as one of the biggest alternate Shonen Jump magazines from another country. I probably won't go through every single one as they come up, aside from Shonen Jump's raise into the West a bit later down the line, but many others existed in an official capacity, and I'm sure other countries have bootleg versions of Jump in their own languages too. It could be a subject for its own video, to be honest, with enough research. But from what we did get, Hong Kong had Exam, Thailand had an analog to Jump called C Kids, as well as Boom, and Germany in 2001 had their own version of Jump called Banzai. Jump would come out physically in other countries too, like Norway and Sweden, but almost all of these endeavors would end in time, only lasting a half decade or so in the 2000s, consolidating into online formats where we have Shonen Jump today. Formosa Youth, though, is one of the only ones that's still serializing, having a selection of Jump's modern roster which they publish there in Chinese, currently featuring things like Undead Unluck, Blue Box, Kagurabachi, and this all began back in 1992, where they would serialize a small selection including Rokudenashi Blues, YuYu Hakusho, Hana no Keiji, Out to Zone surprisingly, I'm really glad China enjoyed that one too, and of course they would serialize Dragon Ball as well. This year we return to the androids who have recently awakened, but they aren't the only threat our heroes face in 1992, as something else has time traveled to their era. Trunks points out that there's a second time machine that isn't his, which has the remains of some kind of egg within. I love how chaotic the beginning of the Cell Saga is. You have Goku resting up, Vegeta powering up, androids on the loose looking for Goku, Trunks wanted to track them down, and now Cell, a being who replicates the powers of others and only grows more powerful as time passes, is also on the loose. It must have been so exciting and unexpected at the time to think you were going to see one set of antagonists be the villains, only for this weird bug creature to pop up, scuffle with Piccolo, and go on to absorb Android 17's powers, becoming even stronger. Speaking of Piccolo, 1992 really is his year, with him getting a lot of focus, having multiple fights against Cell, and while he wouldn't win, he looked cool as heck losing. Piccolo isn't the only one who gets cool fights either, since one of my favorite characters, Android 16, gets a pretty extensive fight with Cell too. I'm not sure what it is about him, but I love his design, goofy rocket fists, and his general cool guy attitude. We also get some great Vegeta moments here too, with him powering up and even allowing Cell to get stronger, becoming Perfect Cell, which is super on brand for Vegeta. The Saiyans wanting an ever stronger challenge, even if it means putting the world at stake, is what Dragon Ball is all about sometimes. Cell's designs in this arc are pretty interesting. Like Frieza, they both have these odd forms which I don't think are as remembered visually compared to their final ones. I do like how alien Cell starts out as though, even if one of the humanoid designs in the middle looks quite goofy with the big lips. Perfect Cell though looks really great. He's menacing and iconic, also possessing the ability to regenerate like Piccolo, which catches Vegeta off guard. Another thing I really like about Cell is his drive. Like Goku and other Saiyans, he wants to get stronger. He isn't afraid to trample over others to do so though, making him a perfect adversary for Dragon Ball. And because of his strength gaining drive, it's a perfect excuse for a tournament arc to begin. Cell wants to fight the strongest of Earth, including Goku, who's been training with Gohan this entire time. Citing the Tenkai Budokai as an inspiration, he aims to create the Cell games. His Cell games have a few twists though. Combatants will fight him one at a time, and should no combatant win, he will systematically wipe out every human being on Earth. And thus we have the setup for one of Dragon Ball's greatest arcs. I really love how it all twisted and contorted to get to this point. Due to how long running Dragon Ball had been up till now, we also have a large roster of characters for Cell to fight, including the androids recently introduced, who roll up to the games too.
Hold on, Vegeta, I got an idea.
This year also marks the introduction of another one of Dragon Ball's greatest characters, Mr. Satan or Hercule. I really love the levity he brings to this arc, acting as the toughest of them all, breaking 14 tiles with his bare hands. The comedy inherent to him being so low down on the power scale is just super goofy and one of my favorite jokes in Dragon Ball. He talks all big like a wrestler, but he gets yeeted out of the ring without so much of a thought by Cell, who eyes up Goku as his first real opponent of the tournament. But the majority of the games would span 1993, so for now, this is as much Dragon Ball as we're going to cover today, so tune in to the 1993 video to see the Cell games in its entirety. Ozumo Deka by Taro Gachon would be a gag manga lasting 1 volume and 10 chapters. The title in English is Sumo Detective, which pretty much tells you all you need to know. The manga followed Ozeki, a man returning from his service in the FBI to become a police officer in Japan, with him having an overbearing love of sumo, to the extent that he solely goes around dressed as one and even has a sumo ring in his police office. Gags were likely quite nonsensical, involving sumo, with Ozeki forcing criminals and ne'er-do-wells into sumo matches with him as some weird form of rehabilitation. The artwork is also quite unique. It's quite chunky and amateurish, but also charming. I think very suitable for a comedy manga. Chibi would be Yoichi Takahashi's next sports manga, with him continuing to try other sports between his original and rebooted runs of Captain Tsubasa. This time we would get a boxing manga lasting 53 chapters and 6 volumes total, seeing protagonist Satoshi Nakamoto, a third-year junior high student who is bullied over his height, fight back and join a boxing club. This is a real underdog story, really zoning in on the shonen sports trope of someone having a small stature. Instead of focusing on them not being able to compete properly, it's more of an internal struggle as Satoshi seems genuinely frustrated and upset about his own body and how others treat him due to it, channeling all that emotion into the sport of boxing so he can feel better about himself as well as show others that despite his height he can become strong. It looks like a really cute little manga, and I want to praise Takahashi for making a protagonist who doesn't look exactly like Tsubasa, since most of them do. While it didn't end up lasting that long, and compared to Captain Tsubasa it's fairly forgotten, it did make a small impact and seems fondly remembered by some, which feels appropriate for little Chibi. Ultimate Pervert Mask or Hentai Kamen by Keishu Ando would last 54 chapters and 6 volumes. Being a fairly well-known manga, I think, or at least to me, Hentai Kamen always popped up when I started to get into anime and manga, so I was surprised to find that it wasn't all that long, although it did still fill Jump's pages for a whole year. Hentai Kamen would be a gag action series seeing Kyosuke Shikijo, a bit of a kendo tryhard, find himself involved in a bank robbery one day. After beating one of the robbers in the changing rooms, he puts on what he thinks is the robber's mask, but instead it's a used pair of panties, transforming him into the ultimate pervert mask. Most of Hentai Kamen follows this formula of Kyosuke putting on a pair of panties, transforming, and then beating up the bad guy, with them usually ending up face first in his junk for whatever reason. I've got to be a bit honest, this got really old fast, and initially I thought it would be more creative since Kyosuke's mother is a dominatrix, and I thought it would explore kink more as jokes. There is a few instances where Hentai Kamen uses wax or whips to fight enemies, but this is like beginner level BDSM. I thought there would be more of an exploration into sexual deviancy and kink overall. Even if you don't want to explore that at a thematic level, then just use it for jokes since this is a gag manga, but instead it remains formulaic throughout, throwing a few new cast members in here and there, and the highlight for me was a chapter where Arnold Schwarzenegger is just a character who's friends with Kyosuke's mother. He's been on the cover of Shonen Jump, something I bring up a lot because it's a neat little fact and just something really weird. So he has more ties to Jump than you might initially think. I just find that really bizarre. Hentai Kamen's legacy might be what's most special about it though. I think it's generally remembered for being a bit weird, a very visually distinct symbol of Japan's erotic comedy, which might not translate to other cultures and thus has become a little iconic. It's also had multiple one-shots post its initial run, as well as 2 live-action films, which might be a better way to experience Hentai Kamen, as I felt the manga was quite drawn out and a bit too repetitive. Though, if you like goofy erotic comedies, this might be your thing and it's fully translated should you want to give it a go. Psycho Plus lasted 11 chapters in 2 volumes and would be the first manga by Ryu Fujisaki, an interesting artist for the magazine, who is a bit of an underrated character, creating quite a few weird little manga for Jump, which I'm really excited to talk about. Psycho Plus would follow Midorimaru, a green-haired, green-eyed boy who has a complex over his appearance, but one day a capital G gamer girl
Gamers, gaming.
by the name of Yukino compliments his hair, and then they become friends, with the two playing video games together from then on. Midorimaru develops a crush on her, but she only dates people who can beat her at games, prompting Midorimaru to get better, with him finding a game called Psycho Plus, which he intends to challenge Yukino to a game of. Curiously, only he can play this game though, and thus begins his exploration into what Psycho Plus truly is. The manga seemed to balance slice of life, romance, and supernatural battle elements, as Psycho Plus turns out to be a game designed to heighten the psychic powers of specific people throughout Earth in order to save it. This development that Midorimaru is one of 12 green people capable of wielding psychic powers comes very late though, as the manga was tragically cancelled early on. It's a real shame since Ryu Fujisaki was a very promising rookie at the time and would later hit it off with Hoshin Engi in a few years. I'd say he can be characterized as making manga that deviate from what's normal or popular, with Psycho Plus featuring an atmosphere unlike anything else in Jump, being more pensive and featuring the main character's emotions and thoughts more than any other manga at the time. Ryu Fujisaki's distinct art style also shines here. The way he illustrates characters feels very unique, and I think Psycho Plus's artwork is especially charming. I can't really point to anything specifically it reminds me of, maybe older shoujo manga, but all in all it ends up adding to the unique atmosphere Psycho Plus had, which combined with the video game and psychic elements makes it a very intriguing entry of Shonen Jump in 1992. Chikarabito Densetsu Oni wo Sugumono, or Legend of Strong Men, the Onis Successor, would last 21 chapters in 3 volumes, being written by Masaru Miyazaki and with art by none other than Takeshi Obata. This would be a shorter biographical work following 2 sumo wrestlers, Takanohana Koji and Wakanohana Masaru, as they begin their careers in earnest. The 2 were brothers who were raised through the ranks of sumo together, with Koji being a natural, amassing countless wins in his teens and setting numerous age-related records. The manga focuses on the idea of legacy primarily, passing down the torch and other sports-based themes, with it quickly shifting focus to the brothers' earlier years with their father's final match, seeing him pass on his legacy to his boys. I really liked how Legend of Strong Men acts as a time capsule of sumo at the time, providing you with plenty of info on famous wrestlers, with a focus on the brothers, their development, and a story about inheritance, which acts as a history of sumo in microcosm. Takeshi Obata has always had a great art, but I feel like it's really solidified by this point, and he's proved himself as a great illustrator, especially when drawing people and expressions. I also find it quite interesting that the brothers had a manga about them in 1992. It would have been culturally relevant with both of them debuting in 1988. Their relevance though would stretch into the 2000s, with it sounding like family drama and other events stretched into their later years and almost to present day. I'm not familiar with sumo, but from the onset of their careers it seems like the two were destined to be legends, and I suppose if there was a desire for it, I could see this manga being revisited, as much of the history of these two sumo lies beyond this manga. This is also something fully translated and is a very interesting piece of Jump and sumo history, which I encourage others to read. The translation group did an excellent job here, and while it's not a Jump manga, I do want to briefly shout out their work on Harukanara Ring, an older manga focusing on women's Joshi wrestling. If you want a shorter older manga about combat sports, then these two are pretty great.
Hakusho.
1992 would quite literally begin with the Dark Tournament, with issue 1 of the year introducing us to one of shonen manga's most popular arcs of all time. Spurred on by defeat at the hands of Toguro, who said he'd kill Yusuke and Kuwabara should they refuse his invitation, Team Urameshi sets out to take part in a tournament filled with the denizens of the underworld. Here is where I admit that I actually think the Dark Tournament is a pretty overrated part of Yu Yu Hakusho. It's a fine tournament arc overall that does have its highlights, but with how people discuss it, I expected it to be a lot better than it actually was, when in reality the majority of this arc is about on par with most Dragon Ball Tenkaichi Budokais. It's a decent tournament, just nothing groundbreaking. Well, the ground does get broken several times, but you know what I mean. A big part of that is most of the fights before Team Toguro are just quite bland. They possess some kind of battle gimmick for one of our cast to overcome, but it lacks any meaning or context like in previous arcs, since it's just a series of one-on-one fights. The designs of most of the characters are pretty bland too, aside from a couple of characters, and I've likely just insulted a ton of people's favourite incidental Yu Yu Hakusho characters there. Also, in some teams, there's just clear fodder characters, which is something that just comes as a downside of tournament arcs, I think, as they're often pretty big affairs and suffer from bloating because of how they're structured. I do love the referees though. The cute Dark Tournament announcers and staff are a ton of fun and the highlight of the earlier parts of this arc for me. There is also plenty to love about this arc though. Firstly, the art. Togashi is pretty consistent early on and the fights are visually a lot of fun. There's some pretty standout parts like big punches or Kurama changing forms, which look really cool, but anything involving Toguro looks great, with him being the real star of this arc. That being said, I still don't want to blindly praise him. I think he stands out amongst the others so much since the quality of the other characters being introduced isn't nearly as potent, and for as impactful as his fight with Genkai is initially, it's undercut a bit by the end of this arc. The Dark Tournament flirts with darkness, with actual bad things happening, but I never felt it quite commits to the ideas and tone it wants to convey, which is a shame. Moments like Genkai coming back and Kuwabara's fake death are blemishes on what could have been a much better arc. Thankfully, the actual fights against Team Toguro deliver. Karasu vs Kurama has a bit more substance than the previous tournament fights, and Karasu is one of my favourite incidental characters of the manga. They're beautiful, creepy, and have a really cool design. Hiei vs Bui is okay, it's a good spectacle, and then Kuwabara's fight against Toguro Sr. really shows off the appeal of his character, I think. You couldn't have two characters be any more different, and him learning about Genkai's death through Toguro's taunts fires him up something fierce. Yusuke vs Toguro Younger is a visually beautiful fight that's peppered full of pages of brilliant panel layouts. Togashi's eye for contrasting simple poppy style with hyper-detailed character portraits becomes really apparent here too, and what could easily end up looking silly, I think ends up strengthening both types of art, leaning into the horror, brutality, and seriousness of this bout. It also leans into how gross Togoro's pursuit of power is, all the musculature, his winding flesh, illustrated in a way opposed to everyone else, highlights just how much of a monster he is. Togoro's selfishness, his instinct to push on as a pure black void, even comes across through the artwork. As he sucks the aura of those in the arena, it's as if he also sucks away the detail of the manga itself. with Chapter 108 looking like some of Hunter x Hunter's more infamous unfinished chapters, though it feels like there's some intentionality as to why this chapter was drawn in this particular way. It's really impactful, and like I said, it feels like the art has been sucked up because of how detailed Toguro is. There's a kind of fun meta-ness to that idea of all of the detail going to Toguro. I think the character exploration of Toguro as well, and how he attempts to mirror himself to Yusuke, is also pretty impactful, at least in the moment. His meeting with Genkai post his defeat as well is pretty thought-provoking, and it colours him differently and elevates his character, though I don't find it perfect. I'm not sure his motivations are conveyed all that clearly, and the resurrection of Genkai, complete with a reference to Monmonmon, the manga I mentioned earlier, and the fake-out death of Kuwabara, don't do the mangas any favours in tackling its theme of death in a serious manner. I understand you might want lighthearted moments to just alleviate some of the darkness that this arc tackles, but it also just feels like it cheapens some of the actual arc's emotional weight. This isn't me wanting them to die either, and keeping these characters alive is for the best, I think, for the series, but some kind of injury, a lasting threat, or the manga not turning these moments into jokes afterwards would have gone a long way to it maintaining a stronger tone for me alongside a more meaningful impression. The Dark Tournament feels like a testing ground, using well-formed shonen tropes, which allow Togashi time to experiment, develop battle abilities, develop his core cast and ideas and tones, which he would go on to explore next throughout the rest of Yu Yu Hakusho, as well as Hunter x Hunter. A tournament is an excuse to have a lot of back-to-back fights, and you can ignore large story implications for a while, potentially letting yourself plot the future of your story. I believe that's what let later Yu Yu Hakusho get weirder and more in-depth, or Togashi simply grew alongside his series while creating the Dark Tournament with its stifling, repetitive structure, giving way to something more interesting. But I'm getting ahead of myself, and we'll explore the future arcs of Yu Yu Hakusho in a future history video. And to round out the year, let's take a little trip to Morio, since JoJo's Bizarre Adventure Part 4, Diamond is Unbreakable, would begin this year following Dio's defeat. Part 4 is among one of the most beloved parts of the series, and from its inception you can start to see why. Like a lot of other popular manga at the time, it would opt to focus on delinquent characters, and for the first time the stakes of JoJo weren't nearly as astronomical, with everything being condensed down into the smaller town of Morio, which is a far cry from the globe-trotting adventure we just went through in Part 3. This difference is also felt immediately as we're introduced to Morio and the year 1999 by the narration of Koichi Hirose, an homage to the Koichi in Araki's first series, Cool Shock BT, which similarly also takes place in a smaller town setting. It's cool to see Araki revisiting some ideas like this. Koichi soon bumps into Jotaro, who reprises his role from the previous part, and our new JoJo, Josuke Higashikata, a delinquent with one hell of a hairdo, which if you make fun of in any way, he'll quite literally rearrange your face with his stand, Crazy Diamond, which he goes and does to a bunch of other delinquents immediately when they make fun of him for his hair and for harming a turtle, which he heals from the brink of death afterwards. Conceptually, Josuke is a fascinating character, a delinquent with a heart of gold, a healing main character, but one who gets hyper-aggressive in the right scenarios. Despite that interesting setup, he might be my least favorite JoJo. He's cool but doesn't quite grip me like the rest, so I'm excited to see if me reading Part 4 again will change that opinion. The first arc of the series then sees the serial killer Angelo, who's escaped from prison, terrorize Morio with his stand Aqua necklace. I like that the inciting event for everything is Joseph using his stand to find his long-lost out-of-wedlock son Josuke, only to find a serial killer roaming Morio, which will later become more relevant later when he joins the part himself. There's a lot of setup done quietly in the background of this part, as well as thematic ideas, with Angelo being a serial killer and our later main villain being one as well. Something I don't remember from the anime is just how brutal part 4 can be. I anticipated after part 3 that it might be toned down a bit, but maybe it's just because of the small town setting filled with high schoolers. Any gore or brutality just hits twice as hard instead. Angelo's crimes, for instance, are something I hesitate to really bring up because it's pretty damn graphic. There's this maliciousness to early part 4 which really caught me off guard. This all makes the first arc pretty engaging though, as we're up against a stand user who will not hesitate to brutally murder our protagonist and the people they love. The cat and mouse game of trying to anticipate Aqua Necklace's attacks as it manifests through various liquids is also really fun as well. JoJo Part 4 immediately introduces us with an arc that isn't a flat out brawl or a test of raw power against each other, but some mind games, which the part would delve into more and more as it would go on. Angelo's fate as well is something quite interesting. Josuke punching him into a boulder is pretty wacky, and I like how it becomes the first installment in Morio's wide array of odd spots throughout its town. It's important as the town itself is an important focus of the arc, as Josuke and his allies attempt to protect it and keep it safe from people like Angelo. Without such a big threat like Dio or the Pillarmen, how does Part 4 attempt to structure its story though? Thus far with previous parts, we've pretty much had a villain in mind from the very beginning, but Part 4 opts to be a bit more mysterious, gradually drip feeding us villains and information which originally all stems from Dio's aftermath. This is an idea I really like and one we'll be dealing with for the foreseeable parts within Jump. Dio might have been defeated, but just like the Joestars, he has a legacy. His actions have repercussions which in a twist of fate, the Joestars still must deal with. I'm not sure how well Part 4 handles this idea yet. It does approach it so far, but it never seemed too obvious to me until I read one of Part 4's spin-offs, which I might as well mention now in tandem with the core of Part 4's initial plot, Crazy Diamond's Demonic Heartbreak. Part 4's core conflict at the beginning deals with the stand arrows, an item that Inaba the Hag had in Part 3, which has the potential to awaken stands in those who survive getting shot with one. This explains how so many people likely got their stands. Part 4 then opens up with someone using these stand arrows to awaken people all over Morio, with Angelo being one of those people to gain his stand. Crazy Diamond's Demonic Heartbreak is a prequel to the part that sees Josuke meet up with Hull Horse, Kakuin's sister, and some other characters touched by Dio who are also brought in, with it examining the idea of the damage Dio caused originally, the people he touched in a negative way as opposed to all the friends the Joestars make throughout their journeys. It was written by Kohei Kadono, the author of the Boogiebop Phantom series, and illustrated by Tasuku Karusuma, the creator of No Gun's Life, with it also having a light novel adaptation. I won't be covering it extensively here as it's not a part of Jump, but I adore this small side manga. It's an excellent companion piece to Diamond Unbreakable and JoJo as a whole, and I recommend it to any JoJo fan who hasn't read it to read it. It really delves into Part 4's themes or just the idea of Dio's aftermath in a really fun and thoughtful way. And back to Part 4 in earnest, in a way, Jotaro and Josuke are on cleanup duty, snuffing out the legacy of Dio, which gets more solid as we go through our second arc involving the Nijimura brothers. Here, Koichi gets shot with a stand arrow, and we meet regular cast member Okuyasu, who has one of the most dangerous stands ever, the Hand, which, like Cream, can erase anything. While most people cite Okuyasu as not using his stand effectively since he's dumb, I actually think he uses it in some pretty smart ways. Erasing space to reduce or create distance, and him not actually attacking others with it, is proof of his kind heart. His brother Keicho is much more of a bastard though, and the archer who's been granting everyone stands. His stand bad company is comprised of a lot of small soldiers with their own tanks and helicopters, which is pretty fun to watch Josuke overcome. We also get to see Koichi develop his stand in this arc as well, which turns out to be Egg. As to why Keicho would shoot Koichi to give him a potential ability that could stop him, I really love the answer. Keicho has been shooting people with stand arrows throughout Morio in order for them to develop stands, and as to why he wants people with stands, it's because he's looking for someone with the ability to kill his father. This wraps back to Dio's legacy, as their father was a henchman of his, but upon Dio's death, something went wrong, and the flesh bud inside of him caused him to transform into a hideous, always regenerating creature. Keicho, out of a bizarre sense of duty, wants to end his father's suffering so he can move on with his life, but nothing he does will kill his father. There's a really nice moment here where Josuke restores a picture their dad was after of them as a family. It's pretty sad and colours the situation in this pretty ambiguous, morally grey field I really like. Even if Keicho did go a bit far, firing stand arrows at known serial killers and all sorts of random people. This does come to bite him in the ass though, as a stand suddenly comes through an electric socket, stealing the bow and killing Keicho. Red Hot Chili Peppers, our next mysterious big bad. By now you've also probably noticed that all the stands are musical references, or at least the last one, since Red Hot Chili Peppers is among one of the most famous initial musical references JoJo gives out. Technically this started back in part 3 with stands like cream and tenor sax, or even further through general musical references with names like Dio or Speedwagon. I find stands' musical names a very fun addition to the series, and thought I'd bring it up here. Red Hot Chili Peppers intro is sick too. I love its initial weird appearance, and it gives the part a fun quality where the enemy could be around any corner at any time in this small town. Post this event, we also have a few smaller arcs to finish the year off, with Koichi getting harassed by Tamami Jobayashi and his stand The Lock, which imposes and amplifies the feelings of guilt on others. This ends up causing Koichi's stand to evolve into Echo's Act 1. Another cool change, showing some stands have the capacity to change, and it reflects its song referencing being split into acts, as well as the growth of the character. The abilities from here on out in part 4 also get a lot weirder than the former part. Some are a lot more specific, like the Lock, which lacks a lot of combat potential, and then there's Echoes that has this weird ability to write words on a surface like an onomatopoeia and reproduce the assigned sound, which Koichi uses to attack sonically, or use in one case to reassure his mother to believe in him, which ends up helping in defeating Tamami. Koichi even gets a Dragon Ball-esque visual transformation here, which I love as well. He's so goofy. The final arc of 1992 then sees us fight Toshikazu Hazamada and his stand Surface, which ends up copying Josuke, resulting in a very fun and often forgotten fight where Josuke fights himself. This is also a good segue into another piece of Part 4 side media, with Hazamada Toshikazu's questionable adventure, published recently at the end of 2024, being made by Kyosuke Usuta, a Jump author we'll get acquainted to shortly in the later 90s history videos. Part 4 is the most touched upon part in side media, as you may have noticed there's a ton of spin-offs and its popularity is immense. A lot of this comes from a certain character who we haven't quite met yet, so I'll save that for another day though. The book, JoJo's Bizarre Adventure Part 4 Another Day, is a light novel from 2007 that sees a new character view the cast of Part 4 as antagonists. There's also Dead Man's Questions, which I'll talk a little bit about in a future Part 4 section 2 when the relevant character is introduced. There's also the live-action adaptation by Takashi Miike, which is an absolute treat that adapts everything up to the Nijimura fight while changing some things around, and I personally love it to bits. I highly recommend watching it as a fan of JoJo and a fan of Miike's movies. And of course, Part 4 would also get adapted by David Production, putting its 174 chapters into 39 episodes across 3 seasons, and I think this might be one of the best adapted parts of JoJo, especially with how much fun they had with all of its weird coloring. As usual with these JoJo parts, I will be covering the next set of arcs that came out in 1993 in the 1993 history video, so stay tuned for that. With JoJo Part 4 now done, let's move on to Shonen Jump's roster at the beginning and end of the year to see what changed throughout 1992. To begin, we have our frontrunners, Dragon Ball, Slam Dunk, Yu Yu Hakusho, Roku Tanashi Blues, some classic battle shonen in JoJo Part 3 and Dragon Quest The Adventure of Dai, Keiji as a historic work as well, and then for comedy we have Magical Talo Talo, Kochikame, Ta-chan and Chin Yuki. We also have some more sports series in Pennant Race and Takeda the Liberio. Video Girl I brings a bit of romance to the magazine, and Outer Zone would give Jump a dose of horror every week. We're then left with a few manga that would be cancelled: Bure, Arabian Lamp Lamp, Tenyori Takaku, and Tengai-kun. While nothing too major would end this year, a few hits would, including Magical Tarotaro and Video Girl I, leading to the magazine losing a chunk of its romance, slice of life, and ecchi elements. Takeda the Liberio would end at the end of the year, Shinyuki would also end too, leading to more gags being serialized, and the duds from 1991, Bure, Arabian Lamp Lamp, Tenyori Takaku, and Tengai-kun would also all end. JoJo Part 3 would also end, giving way to JoJo Part 4, and then we have some new hits. Hareluya II BOY being a delinquent comedy action manga, which would be sticking around for a long time. Bonbonzaka would also act as a new comedy series with light romance elements, with Monmonmon and Hentai Kamen filling the void Shinyuki left as a comedy series, and Hentai Kamen filling some ecchi void, I guess, as well. Chibi filled in for Takeda the Liberio as a shorter sports hit that would last about a year, and then we're left with Chikaribito Densetsu Onibo Sugimono, something I don't think was necessarily cancelled but likely intended to be a short biographical work. The only real dud then is Psycho Plus. Looking at the current lineup, it does feel slightly degraded and less exciting than what we've had in the 80s to me. Even the new big manga like Hareluya and Bonbonzaka don't have the same level of pizzazz or star quality the older long runners Jump had. They do increase a variety a little bit, which is good since some of the more unique manga in Tarotaro and I are now gone, and strictly speaking, everything here did pretty decently. Only having one manga in the magazine that wouldn't pass 20 chapters is really good and isn't something we've seen for a few years. While it hasn't completely taken over, I also want to point out that the delinquent subgenre is growing, with Part 4, Hareluya, YuYu Hakusho, and Roku Tanashi all being part of that, as well as Slam Dunk, I guess, and delinquent figures would also show up more frequently in some other works as well, a small pattern I noticed throughout this year. Jump is still in a really strong place though, and will continue to grow in popularity, sales, and circulation, allowing us to bask in its golden age for a few more years. And that was Shonen Jump in the year 1992. This has been a pretty monumental video to make, a lot of manga released this year, and a lot of manga were available to read in English too. Thankfully, 1993 is going to be a bit of a lighter year, but still full of interesting manga, so please subscribe and keep an eye on the channel for when the next video in this series drops. If you haven't already, also consider going back and watching the other videos I've made on Weekly Shonen Jump like this. They stretch all the way back to the magazine's founding in 1968, although the initial few videos aren't as polished as this one is. I would also be grateful if you'd consider supporting me on Patreon. It helps a ton and pushes me to make better videos. You'll get some cool rewards as well, like being thanked at the end of my videos, with you getting your own little doodle at the $3 tier, like these following cool people. Thank you, Kinocha, Jade, Kazoku Gairu, Sorocool Zero, Holly the Apothecary, Mayu, It's Fako, Yellowtail, Lay Sloggett, Crispy Bacon, Cho Henshin, Full Metal, Unquestionable, Weepy Boy, Whizzle, Valent, Cactus, Joni, City Name E, Vino Burrito, and also AB, Vaka Draws, Otaku Gamer X, Deadpan, Shy Monkeys, Jonathan Dragonet, and John Sanford at the $1 tier. Thank you all so much for being patrons. And as always, thank you so much for watching. Remember to be kind and take care.